Sarah Martinez wiped down the coffee machine for the third time that morning, her hands moving automatically through the familiar routine. The small cafe near the naval base had become her sanctuary after leaving the Air Force 2 years ago. The morning rush was winding down, leaving only a few customers scattered across the worn wooden tables. She had traded her flight suit for an apron, her call sign Phoenix for simply Sarah on her name tag. Most days, she managed to push away the memories of soaring through clouds at 30,000 feet. Most days, she could pretend that serving lattes was enough. The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered. Sarah glanced up from the espresso machine, then did a double take. The man wore a crisp, white naval uniform, his shoulders bearing the distinctive stars of an admiral. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that commanded attention without demanding it. "Good morning," Sarah said, forcing a professional smile. "What can I get you?" The Admiral approached the counter slowly, his keen eyes scanning the menu board above her head. Something about his presence made Sarah's pulse quicken, though she couldn't quite place why. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at memories she had carefully buried. "Just a black coffee, please," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. "Large." Sarah nodded and turned to the coffee machine, grateful for the excuse to break eye contact. As she poured the dark liquid into a cup, she felt the Admiral's gaze on her back. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, more like he was studying her, trying to piece together a puzzle. "You know," he said conversationally, "this place reminds me of a little cafe I used to visit in Norfolk. Same kind of atmosphere." "Is that right?" Sarah replied, not turning around. She had spent time at Norfolk Naval Base during joint operations. The coincidence made her stomach flutter with unease. She placed the coffee on the counter between them, still avoiding direct eye contact. The Admiral reached for his wallet, but instead of immediately paying, he paused. His hand hovered over the bills as he studied her face more intently. "Have we met before?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. There was something sharper in his voice now, more focused. Sarah's heart began to race. She forced herself to look up, meeting his gaze for the first time since he had entered. His eyes were gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean. She had seen those eyes before, in briefing rooms and control towers, during moments when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. "I don't think so," she lied, but her voice came out smaller than she intended. The Admiral tilted his head slightly, the way a predator might when catching an interesting scent. He was reading her the way she had once read instrument panels, quickly and with practiced precision. "You have excellent posture," he observed, almost casually. "Most civilians don't stand quite so straight." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the cash register. She had spent years training her body to hold itself with military precision. Old habits died hard, especially when they had once been matters of survival. "That'll be $3.50, she managed. The Admiral handed her a $5 bill, but instead of releasing it immediately, he held onto it for just a moment longer than necessary. Their fingers brushed, and Sarah felt a jolt of recognition that she couldn't suppress. "Keep the change," he said quietly. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch forever, he added, "You remind me of someone I used to know. A pilot." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She forced herself to stay calm, to keep her expression neutral, but she could feel her carefully constructed civilian facade beginning to crack. "I've never been a pilot," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. The Admiral picked up his coffee and took a slow sip, never taking his eyes off her face. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle. "The pilot I'm thinking of was remarkable. Flew F-18s, had a way of handling emergency situations that was almost supernatural. She saved a lot of lives during her service." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. F-18s. The aircraft she had lived and breathed for 8 years. the machine that had been both her greatest love and ultimate downfall. "She had a call sign," the Admiral continued, setting his coffee cup down carefully on the counter. "Something about rising from ashes, if I remember correctly." The world seemed to slow down around Sarah. The coffee shop faded into background noise. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and the Admiral's words echoing in her mind. Rising from ashes, Phoenix, her call sign, the name that had once been spoken with respect and admiration across multiple air bases. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white with tension. How could he possibly know? She had been so careful, so thorough in building her new identity. Sarah Martinez, the barista, had no connection to Captain Sarah Martinez, call sign Phoenix, who had once been one of the Navy's most promising aviators. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think you have me confused with someone else." But the Admiral's expression told her that he wasn't confused at all. He knew exactly who she was. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recognition and the weight of a past that Sarah had thought she had left behind forever. In the distance, she could hear the familiar sounds of the cafe continuing around them. But it felt like she and the Admiral existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Finally, the Admiral picked up his coffee and stepped back from the counter. But instead of leaving, he moved to a small table near the window and sat down, clearly settling in for a longer stay. Sarah watched him with growing anxiety, her mind racing through possibilities. Was this a coincidence? Had he been looking for her? And most importantly, what did he want? The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. Sarah realized that her quiet, predictable life had just taken a turn that she was completely unprepared for. Whatever happened next, she had a sinking feeling that there would be no going back to the simple existence she had built for herself. The Admiral sipped his coffee and gazed out the window, but Sarah could feel his awareness of her like a physical presence. He was waiting for something, though she had no idea what. All she knew was that her past had just walked through her door and there was nowhere left to hide. Sarah tried to focus on the customers that followed, but her movements felt mechanical, disconnected. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift to the Admiral's table by the window. He sat there calmly, reading what appeared to be a newspaper, occasionally sipping his coffee. To any outside observer, he looked like just another customer enjoying a quiet morning break. But Sarah knew better. She could feel the weight of his presence, the way a mouse might sense a cat in the room. He wasn't reading that newspaper. He was waiting. 20 minutes passed before the next wave of customers arrived. A group of young naval officers entered, their uniforms crisp and their voices filled with the easy confidence of youth. Sarah watched them order their drinks, remembering when she had possessed that same certainty about her place in the world. One of the officers, a lieutenant with kind eyes, noticed her military straight posture as she prepared their order. "You ever serve?" he asked conversationally. Before Sarah could answer, the Admiral's voice cut across the cafe, clear and commanding. "Lieutenant Morrison." The young officer's head snapped toward the window table, his eyes widening as he recognized the Admiral's rank. "Admiral Hartley, sir!" He moved quickly across the cafe, his companions following with obvious curiosity. Sarah's hands stilled on the espresso machine. Admiral Hartley. The name hit her like a lightning bolt, unlocking memories she had spent 2 years trying to forget. Admiral James Hartley, commander of Naval Air Forces Pacific, the man who had personally overseen some of the most critical operations of the past decade. The man who had been in the control room the day her world fell apart. "At ease, Lieutenant," Admiral Hartley said, gesturing for the group to relax. "Off duty, remember?" "Yes, sir. Just surprised to see you here, sir. This is quite a distance from the base." Admiral Hartley's eyes flicked toward Sarah, then back to the lieutenant. Sometimes you find exactly what you're looking for in the most unexpected places. The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. He hadn't stumbled into her cafe by accident. He had come here deliberately, looking for her specifically. But how had he found her? And after all this time, why now? The young officers chatted briefly with the Admiral before collecting their drinks and leaving. Sarah noticed they kept glancing between her and Admiral Hartley, sensing an undercurrent they couldn't quite identify. As the door closed behind them, the cafe fell quiet again. Only Sarah, Admiral Hartley, and an elderly man reading in the corner remained. The silence felt oppressive, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, Admiral Hartley stood and approached the counter again. He placed his empty cup down gently, the small sound seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet space. "The coffee was excellent," he said. "You have a steady hand." Sarah's throat felt dry. "Thank you. Steady hands are important in precision work," he continued, his tone casual but his eyes intent. "Flying, for instance, or making life-or-death decisions under pressure." Sarah's resolve cracked slightly. "Admiral, I think there's been some mistake." "Have there been?" He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Because I remember a pilot who once saved an entire carrier group from a catastrophic collision. She disobeyed direct orders to do it, flew her F-18 into a storm that should have killed her, and somehow managed to guide a crippled transport plane to safety." The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow. The storm, the transport loaded with wounded Marines, the impossible choice between following orders and following her conscience. She had chosen to act, and it had saved 43 lives. It had also ended her career. "The pilot I remember," Admiral Hartley continued, "was court-martialed for insubordination. Despite the lives she saved, despite the medals she had earned, the brass decided that disobeying orders, even for the right reasons, couldn't go unpunished." Sarah's hands began to shake. She gripped the counter edge again, fighting to maintain control. "I don't know what you want from me." "I want to talk to Phoenix," he said quietly. "Because I was the one who recommended leniency during that court-martial. I was the one who argued that a reprimand was sufficient punishment for an action that, while technically insubordinate, demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and courage we need in our officers." Sarah stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. "You..." "What?" "I was overruled," Admiral Hartley continued, his voice carrying a note of old frustration. "The decision came down from higher up. They wanted to make an example, to send a message about the importance of following orders. They didn't care about the lives you saved or the exceptional service record you had built." The admission hung between them like a bridge Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to cross. All this time, she had believed that everyone in her chain of command had abandoned her, had agreed with the decision to end her career in disgrace. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because 2 years ago, I watched one of the finest pilots I've ever known walk away from the service in shame, believing that no one understood or valued what she had done. Because I've spent those 2 years regretting that I didn't fight harder for her." Admiral Hartley reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the counter between them. "Because 3 months ago the Navy quietly reversed your court-martial decision. The transport pilot you saved that day, Colonel Martinez, finally went public with his story. He's been fighting the system ever since your discharge, gathering testimonials from the Marines you saved, from other pilots who witnessed what you did." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the envelope. "What is that?" "Your reinstatement papers," Admiral Hartley said simply. "Full rank restored, service record cleared, back pay included, if you want it." The words seemed to echo in the empty cafe. Sarah felt as though she was dreaming, as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted into something unrecognizable. After 2 years of believing her military career was over forever, after accepting that she would spend the rest of her life serving coffee instead of serving her country, the possibility of return felt surreal. "There's a position waiting for you," Admiral Hartley continued. "Test pilot program, new aircraft development, the kind of work that requires someone with your particular combination of skill and judgment." Sarah's mind reeled. Test pilot work. The cutting edge of aviation, where the best pilots pushed the boundaries of what was possible. It was the kind of assignment she had dreamed of before her court-martial, the pinnacle of a military aviation career. "I don't understand," she managed. "Why now? Why come here personally?" Admiral Hartley smiled, and for the first time since entering the cafe, his expression softened completely. "Because I wanted to see Phoenix again. Because I wanted to personally deliver the news that she was right all along, and that the Navy finally recognizes it." Sarah stared down at the envelope, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Inside those papers was everything she had lost, everything she had mourned for 2 years. Her identity, her purpose, her future. But accepting meant leaving behind the quiet life she had built, the safety of anonymity she had grown comfortable with. It meant returning to a world that had once rejected her, trusting that things had truly changed. "I need time to think," she said finally. Admiral Hartley nodded. "Of course." "But Phoenix?" He waited until she looked up at him. "The Navy needs pilots like you. The country needs pilots like you. Don't let fear keep you grounded when you were born to fly." With that, he turned and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he paused and looked back. "I'll be in town for 3 days. When you're ready to talk, you know where to find me." The door closed behind him, leaving Sarah alone with the envelope and the weight of a decision that would change everything. Sarah stared at the envelope for a long time after Admiral Hartley left. The cafe felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer together. She picked up the envelope with trembling hands, feeling its weight. Inside these papers was everything she had lost, but also everything she had learned to live without. The afternoon passed in a blur. Customers came and went, but Sarah moved through her routine like a ghost. She made coffee, took orders, cleaned tables, all while the envelope sat hidden beneath the counter, burning like a secret flame. When her shift ended, Sarah drove to the beach where she went every evening to watch the sunset. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its surface catching the golden light of the dying day. She had come here countless times over the past 2 years, finding peace in the rhythm of the waves. Tonight, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. "Sarah?" The voice on the other end was surprised but warm. "Is everything okay?" "Hey, Mom," Sarah said, settling onto the sand. "I need to tell you something." For the next hour, she told her mother everything. About the Admiral's visit, about the reinstatement papers, about the choice that lay before her. Her mother listened without interruption, the way she had when Sarah was a child struggling with difficult decisions. "What does your heart tell you?" her mother finally asked. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the salt breeze on her face. "That I miss flying so much it physically hurts sometimes. That I dream about it every night. That serving coffee is safe and comfortable, but it's not who I am." "And what does your head tell you?" "That they betrayed me once. That going back means risking everything again. That maybe I'm better off staying where I am, where no one can hurt me." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember when you were 8 and you wanted to quit piano lessons because you made a mistake during your recital?" Sarah smiled, despite herself. "You told me that mistakes were just proof that I was trying something difficult." "And what did you do?" "I kept playing. I got better. I learned that the mistake wasn't the end of the story." "Exactly," her mother said softly. "The question isn't whether you might get hurt again, sweetheart. The question is whether you're willing to risk everything for the chance to be who you really are. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the transport full of wounded Marines, about the decision that had cost her everything, but had saved 43 lives. She thought about Admiral Hartley's words, about the years she had spent believing no one understood what she had done. She thought about the young lieutenant who had asked if she had ever served, and how much she had wanted to say yes. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the cafe early. She opened the envelope and spread the papers across the counter, reading every word. Her reinstatement was complete and unconditional. Her service record had been expunged of the court-martial. The position waiting for her was everything she had dreamed of and more. At precisely 10 o'clock, Admiral Hartley entered the cafe. He approached the counter slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he said. "I'll have that black coffee again if you don't mind." Sarah poured his coffee with steady hands, then placed it on the counter along with the envelope. Admiral Hartley's eyes flicked to the papers, then back to her face. "Phoenix reporting for duty, sir," she said quietly. Admiral Hartley's face broke into a genuine smile. "Outstanding. Welcome back, Captain." "There's just one thing," Sarah said, untying her apron. "I want to know that if I ever have to make a choice like that again, between following orders and saving lives, the Navy will trust my judgment." Admiral Hartley extended his hand. "Captain, the Navy is counting on officers like you to make exactly those kinds of decisions. That's why we need you back." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the calluses from years of handling aircraft controls meeting her own from 2 years of coffee service. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. She felt like herself again. "When do I start?" she asked. "Your plane leaves for Miramar in 6 hours, Admiral Hartley said. "That is, if you're ready." Sarah looked around the cafe one last time. It had been her refuge, her hiding place, her sanctuary. But it had never been her home. Home was in the sky, at the controls of an aircraft, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. "I'm ready," she said. As they walked toward the door together, Admiral Hartley paused. "There's something else you should know. The transport pilot you saved that day, Colonel Martinez, he specifically requested you for his squadron, says he owes you his life and the lives of his Marines." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "He doesn't owe me anything." "Maybe not," Admiral Hartley said, holding the door open for her. "But he wants to serve alongside the pilot who taught him what real courage looks like." 6 hours later, Sarah sat in the passenger seat of a military transport plane, watching the ground fall away beneath her. She was wearing a flight suit again, her name and call sign freshly embroidered on the chest. Captain S. Martinez, Phoenix. As the aircraft climbed toward its cruising altitude, Sarah pressed her face to the window and watched the clouds gather around them. For the first time in 2 years, she was flying again. Not as a passenger, not as a former pilot, but as Phoenix, ready to rise from the ashes and soar. The coffee shop grew smaller and smaller below until it disappeared entirely, just another memory in the landscape of her past. But Sarah wasn't looking backward anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon ahead, on the endless possibilities that stretched out before her like the vast blue sky. Admiral Hartley had been right. She had been born to fly, and no amount of fear or past pain could change that fundamental truth about who she was. Phoenix was coming home. In the distance, she could see the coastline of California approaching, and beyond that, the Naval Air Station where her new life was waiting. She closed her eyes and felt the familiar vibration of the aircraft around her, the sensation she had missed more than anything else in the world. When she opened them again, she was smiling. The grounded bird had found her wings, and the sky was calling her home.